You think they let just anyone in here now? Look at this guy. The whisper came from the back of the auditorium, carried on that particular kind of laughter young men make when they think they are being clever and quiet at the same time. 3 recruits in dress white sat slouched in their folding chairs, eyes fixed on the figure who had just shuffled through the side door near the stage. He moved slowly, not from infirmity, but from the deliberate pace of a man who had learned long ago that hurry was the enemy of arriving anywhere intact. He wore a faded canvas jacket the color of wet sand, the kind farmers wore in the fields outside town, with grease stains on the left cuff, and a small tear near the bottom hem that had been carefully stitched closed with thread that did not quite match. His trousers were dark work pants. His boots, scuffed brown leather, were polished only at the toes, the way a man polishes boots when he is going somewhere that matters but does not own anything better to wear. His hair was white, cut short and even, the sort of cut a man gives himself in front of a bathroom mirror on Sunday mornings. He carried nothing in his hands. He found a seat 3 rows from the back, on the aisle, and lowered himself into it with the quiet care of someone whose knees had earned their complaints honestly. The young man in the back row, a recruit named Travis Hollinsworth from a small town in Indiana, leaned toward his friend Bishop and grinned. Probably someone's grandpa, wandered in from the parking lot looking for the bathroom. Bishop snorted. The 3rd recruit, a slim kid named Pellegrino with the eager eyes of someone who had memorized the rank insignia chart twice, said nothing, but he watched the old man with a small frown forming between his eyebrows. The auditorium was filling now. Officers in pressed uniforms moved down the center aisle. The stage held a podium, a row of folding chairs for the dignitaries, and a single ceremonial sword displayed on a velvet stand. The occasion was a commissioning ceremony, the kind held twice a year on this base, and the recruits in the back rows were there because their drill instructor had told them attendance was mandatory and their presence was a privilege. None of them felt particularly privileged. They felt hungry and bored and ready to be anywhere else. The old farmer settled into his seat and did something that the recruit Pellegrino noticed immediately, though he could not have said why he noticed it. The old man, without turning his head, glanced once at the exit behind him, once at the side door he had come through, and once at the stage. 3 small movements of the eyes, performed in less than 2 seconds, and then he folded his hands in his lap and went still. Pellegrino had grown up the son of a Marine, a man who had served 2 tours and come home quiet, and his father had a way of entering rooms that involved exactly this kind of survey. Pellegrino had asked him about it once, when he was 12, and his father had said, "Boy, you don't ever sit somewhere you don't know how to leave from." The memory came back to Pellegrino now in the warm, wood-paneled auditorium, and he looked at the old farmer with new attention. There was something about the way the man held his shoulders, not stiff, not military, but level, perfectly level, as if a carpenter's bubble had been placed across his collarbones and settled exactly between the lines. Travis Hollinsworth, meanwhile, had moved on to other entertainment. He was making a quiet running commentary on the dignitaries filing onto the stage, giving each one a nickname based on their appearance. The base commander became Walrus, the chaplain became Pencil. A civilian official in a gray suit became Taxman. Bishop was struggling not to laugh out loud. "Look at that one," Travis whispered, nodding toward an officer with a chest full of ribbons. "Christmas tree. They give those out for showing up on time?" Pellegrino half listened, his attention still drifting back to the old farmer, who had not moved. The canvas jacket caught the light from the overhead fixtures. Pellegrino noticed for the first time that there was a patch sewn onto the upper left chest of the jacket. It was small, no larger than a playing card, and the colors had faded so much that from this distance it looked like nothing more than a darker square against the canvas. Pellegrino squinted. He could not make out the design. The ceremony began. The base commander spoke first, the kind of welcoming remarks that veterans of military ceremonies could recite from memory. The chaplain offered a prayer. A young lieutenant read aloud the names of the newly commissioned officers, and each one stood, was sworn in, and received his or her certificate to polite applause. Travis Hollinsworth slumped lower in his chair and began counting the ceiling tiles. Bishop closed his eyes for what he intended to be a short rest. Pellegrino kept watching the old farmer. The old man listened to the proceedings with an expression Pellegrino could only describe as patient, though it was not the patience of boredom. It was the patience of someone waiting for something specific, the way a fisherman waits, knowing the line will eventually move. Then, the moment came when the master of ceremonies announced the keynote speaker. The auditorium grew slightly quieter. A door opened at the rear of the stage, and a tall man in the dark blue uniform of a Navy admiral walked out. He was perhaps 70, with silver hair cropped close and a deeply lined face that suggested decades of sun and salt and command. His chest carried more ribbons than Travis's so-called Christmas tree officer, but he wore them quietly, the way a man wears something heavy when he has gotten used to the weight. His name, as announced, was Admiral Vincent Calloway, and he was the former commander of a joint special operations group whose actual designation remained classified. He had been brought here today to address the new commissioned officers about service, duty, and the long arc of a military career. Admiral Calloway crossed to the podium with measured steps. He adjusted the microphone. He looked out at the audience, beginning, as good speakers do, with a slow sweep of the room to gather their attention. His gaze swept the front rows of officers, the middle rows of family members, the back rows where the recruits sat in their poorly maintained postures. And then, his gaze stopped. It stopped on the third row from the back, on the aisle. It stopped on a man in a faded canvas jacket. Admiral Calloway did not move for what felt to Pellegrino like a very long time, though, in truth, it was perhaps 3 seconds. His hand, which had been resting on the edge of the podium, became very still. His shoulders, which had been at the easy bearing of a man about to speak, drew back almost imperceptibly. And then, slowly, deliberately, Admiral Calloway stepped away from the podium. The microphone caught the soft scuff of his shoes on the wooden stage. A murmur began somewhere in the middle rows. The base commander, seated in one of the folding chairs behind the podium, leaned forward with a confused expression. Admiral Calloway walked across the stage. He descended the 3 short steps to the auditorium floor. He began walking up the center aisle. He walked past the rows of officers, past the rows of family members, past the photographers who had been preparing for his speech. He walked with the steady, unhurried pace of a man who has made a decision and now intends to carry it out completely. Travis Hollinsworth sat up straight. Bishop opened his eyes. Pellegrino felt his breath catch in his throat. The Admiral reached the third row from the back. He turned into it. He stopped beside the old farmer in the faded canvas jacket. The old man looked up at him with no surprise at all, as though he had been expecting this exact moment, or perhaps had been hoping it would not come, or perhaps had simply long ago stopped being surprised by anything. Admiral Calloway looked down at him for a long moment, and then he did something that no one in the auditorium had ever seen an admiral do at a ceremony. He came to attention. His heels clicked softly. His back straightened. His right hand rose in a slow, perfect salute. The auditorium went absolutely silent. It was the kind of silence that happens when a great many people, simultaneously, realize they are watching something they do not understand but will remember for the rest of their lives. Admiral Calloway held the salute. He did not lower his hand. He stood beside the old farmer, eyes forward, hand at the brim of an invisible cap, and waited. The old man in the canvas jacket looked up at him with an expression that was difficult to read. There was no triumph in it. There was no satisfaction. There was something closer to gentleness, the look of a man who recognizes another man at the end of a long road and is glad simply to find him still standing. Slowly, the old farmer rose. He did so without using the chair in front of him for support, though he was clearly past the age where most men could manage that. He stood, and as he stood, his shoulders came back into that same perfectly level line Pellegrino had noticed before, and the canvas jacket fell open just slightly, and Pellegrino could see now that the small patch on the chest was a design that looked, from this distance, like a trident behind a number. Numbers. Pellegrino's mouth went dry. He had studied the unit insignia. He had spent late nights memorizing them. He recognized the shape of the patch, even faded, even partial, even from 20 feet away. It was the patch of a unit so small and so classified that its members were sometimes referred to in official documents as belonging to an organization that does not exist. The old farmer returned the salute. He did so with the crisp economy of a man who had performed the gesture 10,000 times in his life, and the gesture, even at 70-some years old, was so clean that it made Admiral Calloway's salute look slightly imperfect by comparison. The two men held the moment. Then they lowered their hands. Admiral Calloway, still standing at attention, spoke, and his voice in the silent auditorium carried easily. "Senior Chief." The old man inclined his head just slightly. "Admiral." Travis Hollingsworth, in the row behind them, had stopped breathing. Admiral Calloway turned then and addressed the auditorium. His voice had changed. It was no longer the polished register of a keynote speaker. It was the register of a man telling a story he had carried for 40 years and had not been sure he would ever have the chance to tell. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "forgive the interruption. I came here today to speak to you about service, about what it costs and what it means and what it asks of the people who give it. I had a speech prepared. I will not be giving that speech." A faint murmur passed through the room. Admiral Calloway placed a hand briefly on the shoulder of the old farmer, who had remained standing. "In 1971, the Admiral said, I was a young lieutenant on my first operation in a part of the world I am still not permitted to name. The operation went badly. The team I was supposed to be supporting was pinned down for 36 hours in conditions I will not describe in this room. I was 23 years old, and I was certain I was going to die there. The man standing beside me right now was the senior enlisted leader of the element that came in for us. He was 28. He had already done more than most men do in a lifetime, and what he did over the next several hours I am not permitted to describe to you either. But I will tell you this. He carried 2 of my men out on his back over a distance I would not have believed possible. He was wounded doing it. He went back for the 3rd. The 3rd did not survive. That is the only failure I have ever heard him acknowledge, and he carries it still. I know because I asked him once, many years later, and his answer was that he should have moved faster." The Admiral's voice did not catch. It was steady. But it was the steadiness of a man holding something very carefully, because he knew that if he gripped it any tighter, it would break. "I owe my life to him," Admiral Calloway said. "I have owed it for 55 years, and every time I have stood at a podium in front of young men and women like you and talked about service, I have known that everything I had to say was something he taught me first." Pellegrino realized, with a small shock, that he was crying. He did not know when it had started. He looked beside him and saw that Bishop was also crying, in the silent, baffled way young men cry when something has come at them from a direction they had not prepared for. Travis Hollingsworth was staring at the back of the old farmer's head with an expression Pellegrino did not have a name for. Admiral Calloway continued, "I did not know he was going to be here today. I did not know he had been invited. He is a private man, and he does not attend these things. He came, I think, because his great-nephew was commissioned today, in the 2nd row, and I would not have known that if I had not just now seen the young officer wiping his eyes." Heads turned. A young lieutenant in the 2nd row, dark-haired and broad-shouldered, was indeed in the process of pressing the heel of his hand to his eye. He looked, when the auditorium's attention found him, as though he wished very much to disappear. "I want you all to understand something," Admiral Calloway said, and now his voice rose slightly, taking on the timbre of command, the voice that had moved thousands of men in his career. "The man in the canvas jacket has been a farmer for the last 40 years. He raises corn and a small herd of cattle in a county most of you have never heard of. He repairs his own fences. He drives a truck that I personally have ridden in and would not wish to ride in again. He has never, in the half-century I have known him, asked anyone for anything. He has never spoken in public about what he did. He has never accepted an award that was not pinned on him by someone who outranked him so thoroughly that refusal would have been insubordination. And he is, without exception, the finest man I have ever known." The old farmer stood through all of this with his hands again folded in front of him, his eyes lowered slightly, the way a man stands when he is enduring something he would not have chosen but will not interrupt. When Admiral Calloway finished and turned to him, he met the Admiral's gaze and gave the smallest possible shake of his head. The Admiral smiled, just barely. "He is asking me to stop," the Admiral said to the room. I will stop. But before I do, I want to say one more thing, and it is for the recruits in the back rows, whose names I do not know, but whose faces I have noticed during my remarks. Travis Hollingsworth went very still. Pellegrino felt his face grow hot. "You will spend the rest of your career," Admiral Calloway said, "in rooms with people in uniforms. You will learn very quickly to read those uniforms. You will learn the ribbons and the rank insignia and the unit patches, and you will think after a while that you know how to tell who is dangerous and who is not, who has done things and who has only talked about doing things. You will be wrong. Some of the most dangerous men I have ever served with wore no uniform when I met them, and the most important lesson I have ever learned about my profession is that the people who have done the most are almost always the last people you would suspect. Do not laugh at old men in faded jackets. You will live longer and you will be better officers. And on the day you finally understand why I am telling you this, you will be grateful that someone said it to you when you were young enough to hear it." He turned then, fully, and came back to attention. He saluted the old farmer a second time. The old farmer returned it a second time. Then Admiral Calloway walked back down the aisle, climbed the steps to the stage, and stood at the podium in silence for a full 10 seconds before he said, very quietly, "We will now continue with the ceremony." The old farmer sat back down. He folded his hands in his lap. He did not look around. He did not acknowledge the eyes of the room, the cameras that had been raised, the officers who were turned now in their seats to look at him with expressions of dawning understanding. He looked at the stage. He listened. When the ceremony ended an hour later and the auditorium rose for the recessional, he waited until most of the crowd had filed out, and then he stood and made his way slowly toward the side door he had entered through. Travis Hollingsworth, who had not spoken in 50 minutes, stepped into the aisle as the old man approached. He did not know what he intended to say. He had no plan. He simply could not let the man walk past him without doing something, and the only thing he could think to do was something he had not done sincerely since basic training. He came to attention. His posture was poor, his salute was sloppy, his eyes were wet. The old farmer stopped. He looked at the recruit for a long moment with an expression that was neither stern nor warm, but somewhere in between. The expression a man wears when he is deciding whether to give a gift to someone who has not earned it, but who might, given time, grow into it. Then he returned the salute. His was crisp. His was perfect. And then he did something that Travis would think about for the rest of his life. He reached out briefly and placed his hand on Travis's shoulder. He squeezed once. He said, in a voice that was quieter than Travis had expected, the voice of a man who had spent his life learning when to speak softly, "Be better than you were this morning, son. That's all any of us ever managed." Then he walked past, out the side door, into the late afternoon light of the parking lot, where an old pickup truck waited for him with the keys still in the ignition, because in his county, people did not lock their vehicles. He drove home. He fed his cattle. He repaired a section of fence that had come loose in the wind. And the canvas jacket, with its faded patch and its carefully stitched hem, hung where it always hung, on the same hook by the back door, ready for whatever the next morning would ask of him.